Hey folks, welcome to the 2023 BIMForum LOD Spec rollout. Great having you here. Looking forward to this presentation from Jim, Radu, and Lauren. If you have any questions or comments, as always, please throw them in the chat and we'll respond to them as we can. The recording will hit both your inbox and our YouTube page. So if you can't watch the entire thing, we understand. And you'll be able to watch it in its entirety later. That being said, Jim, take it away.
Thanks, John. So the 2023 LOD spec, first of all, a little bit of housekeeping. If you want, this has been approved for one learning unit for AIA. If you want that credit, drop your name and the AIA number in the chat. If you want DBIA credit, it's been approved for that too. You can use that QR code or the link, and that'll be in the download that you'll get. And others like the CM-BIM program and so on, you can self-report, and this will be almost certainly get you credit. So I'm Jim Bedrick. I've been leading the LOD spec effort since its inception about 2011. I'm an architect by trade, but I've worked all three sides of the industry, so I get all of that perspective. And then I also spent 13 years on the AIA Contract Documents Committee, so a lot of that has informed the development of the LOD spec. We also have Lauren and Radu here from the American Society of Landscape Architects. So Lauren?
Oh, we're doing introductions.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Lauren Schmidt. I'm a landscape architect at Parallax team. And yeah, we are a small BIM consultancy. And yeah, I'll let Radu introduce himself.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, Radu Diker. I'm the firm-wide BIM manager for SWA Group, the largest landscape architecture, urbanism, and planning office in the US. I basically started in the architecture realm, spent a lot of time in MEP after that, having a background in physics. MEP BIM management is the longest stretch in my career, and 4 years ago I joined SWA to assist with BIM implementation for the landscape architecture projects. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. So getting right into it, what we want to learn here is, first of all, there are some consistent logical threads that go through the LOD spec, and those have been kind of firmed up for the 2023 version, and we want to be able to identify those. And we've also added a section on defined terms, which we'll get into in more detail. We want to understand the impact of the 2020 update to the LOD definitions. Pardon me, I think that was 2022 actually. And then we want to get into applying the LOD framework to landscape models, which turns out to be a little bit different animal and was really an interesting and fun endeavor to do that. So the agenda, we will look at, first of all, what is level of development. Apologies to those of you who already know all about what it is. We usually find in every audience there are a few people who don't know what it is, haven't run into it before. There are some slight misconceptions a lot of the time, so we need to kind of make sure we're all on the same page there. We'll look at the LOD definitions, how they evolved, and then the 2022 definitions, and the interpretations that BIMForum have made for those definitions to guide the development of the spec. We'll look specifically then at the BIMForum LOD specification, and we'll look at the enhancements that we did in our overhaul for 2023, and then we'll look at those defined terms, and then we'll hand it over to Radu and Lauren to show what we did with landscape architecture. So what is LOD, right? Well, It starts out with, we looked at the problem here, which one of these is a BIM, and actually, of course, the answer is both. But given that, then how do you know what you want in a model? How is an owner able to define what they want in a model? How is an architect able to know that they're meeting their deliverables? And the big issue is, how can you rely on a model? So some of the problems that we saw were that when we were dealing with paper, we had visual cues about the state of development. If it looked like the thing on the left, we knew everything was approximate. But the problem is with a model, whether it's at the napkin sketch stage or the final CDs, it looks like the thing on the right. And the model can carry a lot of unintended information. I may have grabbed that door as a placeholder and it happens to be a Conair door, but that's not what I'm going to spec. So there's a lot of information in the model that I don't intend, and a lot of information I don't even know about. So the response to this has usually been this disclaimer that says, pretty much the model looks great so you can look at it, but you can't use it for anything or rely on it for anything, which includes but is not limited to everything. And there's usually some legalese in there that says if you do use it for something and get me in trouble, then you got to pay my lawyers. So have a nice day. What that boils down to is that everybody was saying, okay, well, some of the information in the model is not reliable, so don't rely on any of it. So basically throw out the baby with the bathwater. In the AIA, when we got a hold of it in the AIA Documents Committee, we developed this specified use approach. And we said, yeah, some of the information is not reliable, so only rely on what I say you can for the purposes I say you can and to the degree of precision I say you can. So if I've got to specifically tell you that you can rely on something, when I don't mention something, it's something I don't know about, I don't say anything about it, you automatically cannot rely on it. So you don't get me in trouble. So how do you stay all that? What you can rely on and to what degree? That's where the LOD schema comes in. So things progress, systems progress through the design process in varying rates. Usually structures leads everything, interior finishes and casework brings up the tail. So at any given point, things are going to be at a different state of maturity. They all, though, tend to hit some pretty common milestones. You start out with a concept, which might be a cost per square foot on a massing model. You then go further on into putting in generic placeholders. That might be like a rule of thumb depth for the steel floor. And then you get into the specifics. You put in the specific elements that you actually want in the design. And then sometimes you carry those on to further details. So what we deal with in the level of development spec is this idea of level of development versus level of detail. And it's a really important and sometimes misunderstood difference. Level of detail is basically the quantity of detail. So if you look at this model of a steel structure, it looks like specific steel shapes, right? I mean, they probably are specific steel shapes because I grabbed them from a library. I can measure their location precisely, but have these shapes been engineered? Are they the ones the engineer calculated out and really wants? And are they in the location that they should be in? I can't tell that by looking at the model. Visual cues aren't there. So I need something else, and that's where the level of development schema comes in. And so level of development then is, well, level of detail is the quantity of detail. Level of development is the reliability of it. So level of development then addresses those last two questions and many like them. And so has the shape been engineered? At LOD, if it's LOD 200, no. They may look like specific steel shapes, but they may change. That's not what I'm going to wind up using. And are they in the final location? No, not necessarily. But if it's a 300, then I know, yes, those are the right steel members, and they are in the location I intend. Okay, so what can you do with this LOD scheme? You can define deliverables. You can define milestones, like SCDD and CD, or even 50% of those. You can define information exchanges, such as energy simulation or costing or so on. And you can enable others to rely on your model. So specifically then, you can take a look at this in the handout, but there are a lot of things that specifically that you can do with them. Some of the most more useful ones is you can lay out your firm's standards. You can define what your firm means, your firm's business as usual, what we mean by, say, SD, DD, and CD, or as a construction company, what do I need in a construction level coordination model? All right, you can also do a number of different things. One of them, one of the key points is you can scope a modeling effort. You can develop what exactly I'm going to have to model, and not model a bunch of extra stuff that nobody's asking for. Okay, so the LOD definitions. The evolution, first of all, it started back in about 2005 with Graphisoft, and they developed the level of detail scheme to basically control or manage their internal modeling efforts. Well, I was working with Graphisoft at the time, so I took that to the AIA California IPD steering committee. We were looking for something like this, and so that committee morphed it into something more usable, more generally applicable. And we published it in AEC Bytes in 2008, and the AIA Documents Committee got a hold of it and drafted me to help implement that in a contract, and that's when I started with the Documents Committee. In 2011, then, the BIMForum got together and developed the LOD Spec, and we'll get into why that happened here in a minute. In 2013, we developed our interpretations of the LOD definitions. The major one was that we said that at LOD 300, you can measure that element directly off the model. You don't have to depend on called out dimensions. Well, that caused a lot of heartburn at the beginning, but people realized as we went down the road, a lot of designers realized that, okay, this is going to save me a lot of work and not having to lay out these dimensions, just putting them accurately in when I'm supposed to anyway. But so it became a fairly well accepted principle. In 2022, then at the beginning, we convened a committee of a lot of different organizations that you can see there, and to update the definitions. And what we wound up doing, that committee basically ratified the BIMForum's interpretations and folded them into the new ones. Okay, so the 2022 LOD definitions. First of all, LOD 100 is pretty much the same as it was. A little bit more detail, but basically it's pretty much anything that's less than recognizable geometry. Okay, so anything like a symbol that indicates the location or the existence of an object, or say a space reservation volume. You say, I need a cube this big. I want to make sure that that's a no-fly zone because I might put something in there. Anything that's not recognizable geometry, but you can derive it from the model, is LOD 100. 200 then, it gets to recognizable geometry. It's going to be it's probably a generic placeholder. It's pretty approximate, but I can recognize it. I can see that it's a beam or a light fixture or whatever. 300 then gets to the measurable element. So the definition specifically is the model element as designed is represented within the model such that the quantity, size, shape, location, and orientation can be measured. So that was the BIMForum interpretation of 300 rolled into the AIA contract documents definition. So basically, our interpretation is that a 300 element is developed sufficiently to fully convey the design intent. Right? Given that, then it's usual that designers don't go beyond 300 because they've reached their design intent. Neither the definitions nor the BIMForum specification say anything about who develops the element, but usually the usual practice is that designers don't go beyond 300. 350 then is the level needed for tight construction level coordination. And the thing is that 350 usually requires craft knowledge to develop. So that's in seeing that, you can see why designers usually don't go to 350. Nothing prevents them from doing that. And for example, if you have a design build mechanical firm, then they are going to have craft knowledge in-house, and they may well take their contract documents or contract drawings to some of the elements to LOD 350. 400 then is a shop drawing level. So if usually what happens is if the specs call for a shop drawing of a certain item, you might model that element at 400. And the thing to note here is that that very few things then in a model ever get to 400. You'll see sometimes people want to require models with everything at 400. That's unrealistic. Okay, most things will be in a design model will be at 200 and 300 and even some 100s. In a construction model, they may get to 350, but very, very few get to 400. Now, 500 is a little bit of an anomaly. The confusion is that it doesn't actually indicate a higher level than 400. This is where we jump to actual measurement of existing objects. So while 400, the geometry is determined through design, and it's the design of an object that is that will be constructed in the future. 500 is determined through measurement of an existing object. So the thing is then, you can see that there's no, 500 doesn't give any indication of what the accuracy should be. That needs to be added to it. And what we've done, we've worked with the U.S. Institute of Building Documentation. They have a really great publication called the Level of Accuracy Spec. And that is very easily adapted to add the accuracy the accuracy requirements to measurement of existing conditions. Okay, so the LOD specification, these short paragraph definitions were great, but we found that they could be interpreted widely. So what I thought of as a 200 door might not be what you're thinking of as an LOD 200 door. So what we did was got together and defined various building elements at the different LODs. Okay, so this LOD spec is essentially a dictionary. So now if you want a certain level of development on a door, you want me to model that for you, you can look in here, say, okay, what I'm asking for is LOD 200. So then you tell me that you want an LOD 200, you want the doors at LOD 200. I look in here and say, well, okay, that means this, this, and this is required. And so I model it, and you're getting exactly what you want. Thing to note about this, couple of points about the LOD spec, the recent release. First of all, BIMForum has gone through quite an evolution. From started out back in 2005 as part of the AGC, or under the AGC. This is the logo you saw then. And then we went out on our own about 2019, and for a while we used this logo, and now we're using this logo on the right. So all of these logos are actually the same BIMForum. It's just evolved. The one you see on the upper right-hand corner here is the one that will be used going forward. Another thing to note is the wide support that this has of major industry organizations like National Institute of Building Sciences, AGC, and so on. All right, so it's very widely supported by industry. Part 2 of the spec is this that lays out the model development specification, and this is a spreadsheet template that is downloadable with the spec. Basically, what you have here is the rows are building systems laid out by uniformat, and the columns are model definitions. And so you'll see in each column there will be an LOD for elements that are in that project. There will be a model element author who is going to actually model that element. And then there's also a column for notes. We couldn't possibly anticipate every variation of how this might be used, so there is a function for putting keynotes in here, and then there's a notes tab. So you can put in things like, okay, we're not going to model any conduit less than 1/2 inch or whatever. Those kind of things are specific to projects, and there's a very easy way and obvious way, recognizable way to deal with those kind of individual requirements. The creation process is important because this is why it has become an industry standard. We divide up the 7 uniformat divisions into some domain groups, and then the domain groups is where things start. The domain groups, each of the domain groups begins the process. They drafted the definition that suffices for them, the experts. This then goes to the core group, which contains designers and builders from each of these domain groups. Okay, and we go round and round with this thing until everybody comes to consensus on it. So the first draft satisfies the experts. The final draft then works for across disciplines. The first time we publish each edition, we send it out for public comment. It's clearly labeled as a public comment draft, and we get a bunch of comments back, and a lot of them we can take and go back through the process and adjust things to incorporate what the industry sees, and after that, then we publish the final edition. We had to strike a balance between being flexible enough to actually have keep up with the developments in building information modeling, but we didn't want to be so flexible as it became too squishy to use as a contract exhibit. So we settled on publishing every year, and we keep all the past versions available at BIMForum.org/LOD. So if you start out in 2019 on a project, you can sign up to the 2019 version. When 2021 comes out, you have the option of going with that or sticking with the 2019 version. Okay, so you have the flexibility, but it is solid enough and stable enough that it can be used as a contract exhibit. So the 2023 overhaul, we didn't add much new content except for the major section on landscape, but we overhauled the spec for a number of reasons. First of all, we wanted to eliminate nebulous terms. The 300 definition used to say that LOD 300 meant you had to model major openings. Well, we got a lot of pushback on that. What the heck is a major opening? So instead of calling for major openings now in the 2023 version, we call for a specific size. It's usually defined as anything with any opening with a dimension greater than 6 inches. And then that is, of course, modifiable through the notes. If you want to not model anything less than 12 inches, you can state that in the notes. We wanted to simplify things. There were things like in the exterior or the interior finishes section, there were a whole bunch of different definitions for different types of finishes, whether it was paint or wall covering or tile or stone facing or whatever. We realized, though, in looking at this, that the definitions, the requirements were really defined by the thickness of the finish. So what we did, we said, for example, is LOD 300. If LOD 300 is called for on an interior finish, that means you have to model it if it's if it's thicker than a 1/4 inch. Okay, if it's not, then you don't have to model it. Okay, so it doesn't matter what it is. It can be ceramic tile, it can be carpet, whatever. It doesn't matter. If it's a 1/4 inch or greater, you model it. If it's less than a 1/4 inch, you don't.
That solves the paint argument, right, Jim?
Yeah, exactly.
Do I model the paint on my walls?
Well, if you've got a 1/4 inch of paint, then yeah.
you got problems if you got a 1/4 inch of paint. You
Yeah.
might have a World War II battleship.
Exactly. So yeah, well, that's what we were trying to do was address some of these conflicts that came up or contradictions that came up before. So the LOD requirements, they used to be, we had things like, it's not required to model this or whatever. We took all of that out. We just stuck completely with what is required. Okay, didn't mention what was not required. And of course, the thing is, the LOD requirements are minimums, right? You can model anything else you want. It's just if you say it's LOD 300, you can't rely on anything above the 300 requirements. These narrative descriptions, then, they used to be kind of paragraph stories. We've organized these and simplified them into bullet lists that act as checklists to make sure that you've got all the requirements for the LOD for that element. And then non-geometric information. There were some places in the previous version where it called for things like the grade of steel or concrete, that sort of thing. We had decided before, but these were kind of mistakes. We had decided before that LOD, the level of development that we're dealing with, deals only with geometry. Other kinds of information, like that grade of steel or concrete, can be attached as attributes. And the thing is that non-graphic information can be attached to any element at any LOD, so it really doesn't depend on the LOD. It's another schema that tells you what information needs to be attached to those elements. And so we took out all mention of non-graphic information in the LOD definition narratives. We found some duplicated content and either pulled that out or replaced it with cross-references. And then we defined some terms that were used throughout the document, but in some cases were somewhat nebulous. And these defined terms, then, they're up front, they're defined, and then where they're used in the narratives, they're in boldface, so you know that it's a specific defined term. So, starts out with accurate. Now, accurate has caused heartburn through the development of LODs since the inception. People were scared of the word accurate because we didn't know quite what it means. If I tell you to model something accurately, what does that mean? So we're defining it here as accurate means conforming exactly with the intended dimension. Okay, so if I intend a wall to be 3'6" and 3/64 of an inch from a grid line, that is exactly where I model it. Okay, there doesn't have to be a tolerance on modeling, on design modeling, because you can place a design model element with essentially zero, plus or minus zero tolerance. It's not needed, and it's actually easier really to place it at that calculated dimension. You can see probably what's coming here. That definition is a little bit tough when we're talking about natural things that the landscape architects deal with. And Lauren and Radu are going to delve into this more succinctly in a minute. Actual versus nominal. All right. What we came up with here was that actual, when we talk about like the actual dimension of a rough opening, that's the dimension that is needed for construction level coordination. Nominal, though, is the dimension that is usually available at the design phase, which may differ from the actual rough opening. Okay, so when you place a model in a wall in a Revit, when you place a door in a wall in a Revit model, it punches a hole, right? That hole suffices for the nominal dimension of the opening. And it may well be a little different from the actual rough opening dimension. We use the term element envelope. When we used to call it things like overall geometry, kind of nebulous. So we talk about the element envelope, which is really the extents of the element, and the basically the exterior surfaces. And we use that term both at 200 and 300. At 200, those extents can be approximate, but 300 they have to be accurate, accurate per our definition of the term. Penetration elements were kind of a confusing point at one point. These are elements that reinforce or otherwise enhance a penetration through another element. So like a sleeve in the concrete wall where a pipe goes through. And what we consistently deal with those now under the division of the penetrating element. So a pipe sleeve in a concrete wall is not addressed under the concrete wall, it's addressed under pipes. And at level 350 for piping, for example, penetration elements are required. Okay, so we had a little bit on landscape architecture previously, but it was pretty sketchy. This year we collaborated with the American Society of Landscape Architects, represented by Lauren and Radu, and it was an interesting and fun effort because landscape elements are fundamentally different in a lot of ways from building elements. So the schema that was designed for building elements had to be stretched to accommodate the landscape architecture elements. So Lauren and Radu, can you take it away and add more color and shade to that?
Definitely, and I seem to be getting some noise. Hopefully that's going to go away. But thank you, Jim. I'll introduce this section by saying that first that me and Lauren are co-leading the civil and landscape domain group, co-leading or co-chairing. And obviously, as introduced by Jim, there's a major substantial progress with typical landscape architecture scope in the LOD Spec 2023, which was essentially a pursuit within the American Society of Landscape Architects and its core group, the BIM working group, for a while now. But this time we joined the BIMForum efforts to develop the corresponding sections. And landscape architecture poses some specific challenges, which are, I posit, rather unique in the BIM world. And to correctly frame the questions, I'm proposing to sort of discuss specific challenges. For instance, there's some scope considerations we should take into account, as our scope includes planting soil, items which are subject to growth, erosion, natural processes which are difficult to account for and predict the behavior of. Additionally, we deal in most projects, if not all, essentially, with existing conditions documentation and the feasible accuracy of that. And I'm sure John would be very interested in in coming to this part of the conversation for sure. And I propose the term level of documentation is a play on LOD, but I think these aspects get very impactful to our tackle of LOD. And Jim talked about LOD 500, which includes actual measurements and tolerance and other concepts of that nature, and also level of accuracy (LOA) as defined by other institutions. Another aspect to account for is consistency over time. In a sense, then that brings up the 4D aspect of BIM, and this is because of evolutions of objects that I described. Also, parts of scope are frequently subject to contractor adjustment field conditions, such as boulders, which we haven't even yet tackled for LOD. It's part of our project for this year, and they'll probably be published in the 2024 edition. And last but not least, in a sense, at least in the practice of things, there is the elephant in the room, which we should be agnostic of by, I would say, BIMForum mission, but mindful of them, right? So that because there's software limitations and software challenges because of the eclectic assortment, particularly as it pertains to landscape and civil, and the interconnectivity with the other trades, as I'll describe in a moment. But there's also the consideration of adoption, right, of BIM by landscape as we introduce these LOD spec sections, and essentially the disciplinary readiness. And so I would propose that, though, as often is the case, challenges are also opportunities for expanding the capacity of BIM to incorporate new types of objects, primarily as part of horizontal project scope. And in this pursuit, arguably both landscape architecture and BIM, I would say, have much to gain. And when working on the LOD spec for landscape, we observed convergence between our solutions and overall considerations with active explorations and research within the BIMForum LOD ecosystem. And Jim, I'm sure could vouch for that. There's a few concepts which are critical that Jim described and defined, but they factor into our practice maybe more than others in a sense, because we're stretching. I think I would posit we're stretching the capacity of tolerance, precision, accuracy, nominal and actual to present BIM product. And the way I mean, in terms of accuracy, just going to accuracy, and we could discuss definitions for all the other terms, but in terms of accuracy, in our case, I think we could examine the absolute accuracy of a position of a real space, of a point in space, right, which has to do with the field documentation, and the relative accuracy of dimensions between points, edges, and so on of basically items that we design. And in gauging the reasonable expectations from landscape architecture specific scope items, and Jim already presented this language, but we try to define that to tailor the expectations that basis of design should be the primary angle to examine our BIM deliverables beyond exact dimensions and quantity takeoffs, within reason.
So, Radu, what does that mean? Does that mean that I can do digital layout on the Palo Verde trees on my site?
Yes, I mean, but you have to be mindful of the limitations in doing that, right? And this I think there's different parts of where the limitation factor in, right? What are you getting from field conditions? What are you getting from the design team? How even I would even stretch it to the point where, as I'm seeing job sites of project evolving, I am seeing erosion as the project basically gets built, right? And I'm seeing field conditions factoring in the timeline of putting the project together, and I think that's something that again, it's specific to us because we are in between buildings and subject to these to this erosion. Now, that said, that feels like a limitation, but at the same time, I think LA is critical to landscape architecture, critical to the success of the BIM because we are primary representatives of horizontal scope, but also because we execute critical coordination, not only between us and civil, which we overlap on scope with, but also with the building disciplines, architecture, MEP, structure, where in actual projects, I feel that we're typically the coordinating tissue, right? That we're connecting all disciplines in ways that may have not been done before. And I think the critical mission of the LOD spec is to provide the medium for doing that. And I like to call landscape as like this interstitial discipline that's the connecting tissue of the BIM as overall deliverable. Now, being a bit more specific as how we've wrote the LOD to account for our scope, a couple of notes, and these are sensitive to feedback we received and things that we've been thinking of. Part 2, the notes are available for a couple of additional pieces of information, namely to further refining a certain item's LOD to account for locality project-specific firm deliverables. For instance, the trees and large shrubs section for 300 mentions, which is new for the LA spec, canopy size at maturity to be 75 to 100%, or as noted. So, or as noted can be part of the part 2 notes and can be specific to a 10-year growth or whichever other sort of local jurisdictions or authorities want for the canopy to be clashable, or to state scope segregation. For instance, the retaining walls for 350 mentioned footing to be depicted or designed, but it does not state which discipline is doing that. Part 2 can do that, can set clear language as to which discipline, I mean, the discipline in charge of a certain section, if they're going to be modeling the footings.
Radu, one thing that I think is fantastic in here, especially related to canopy size, is that it also includes root ball, right?
Absolutely, because, and that's yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Just the number of projects where the root ball can turn into a very, very real site coordination constraint. Like it happens a lot, and we end up having these unpleasant, uncomfortable scope conversations about who's modeling the root ball because it might be hitting a basic building utility. So I'm particularly excited about that. Sorry, I couldn't stay quiet.
Yeah, no, great. I think considering LOD from the vantage point of landscape can fill scope gap issues, can bridge scope gap in ways that hasn't maybe been done before, or provides the medium for doing that very well. Absolutely, it's something that we're seeing in all international projects, and we're seeing it in some domestic projects. It's one of the early coordination, massive coordination that involves us, root balls versus site utilities and major MEP. That may be available at that time, but site utilities are probably going to be able to be clashed early on. All right, let's see. All right, so in terms of future engagement with tackling LOD specs, we feel that expanding LOD interpretations to additional BIM uses could enhance their usability. And these are sort of just responses to things that we've already discussed or that we've seen as we were looking at LOD Spec for landscape. Essentially, as we've examined the friction and imperfect translation of legacy LODs with LA scope, considering them through the lens of additional BIM users provides clues, I think, for further development. And to be a little more specific, well, we're going to discuss 3 sections. I'll discuss irrigation because I have an MEP background. And I want to say, a lot of this work was basically done within ASLA, but with industry feedback from these contractors to consultants to different partners in projects. But in terms of irrigation specifically, what we've been mindful of is high return items, and we're sort of going, John, to site utilities coordination, if you want, with root balls. And how that connects to this is that the main line is the item that I think returns high on coordination, and we've been mindful of that. Secondly, clearance for access to service different equipment that pertains to irrigation. And I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'll keep this very short, and I'll invite Lauren to talk about plantings.
Sure. Thanks, Radu. Yeah, so I think the major difference that we're seeing in 23 with planting, because we're kind of building off of some existing landscape definitions, was that we specifically broke out smaller plants from larger trees and shrubs. So you'll see that, yeah, maybe we'll kind of switch back and forth here between these two. But yeah, larger trees and shrubs, it's more important that we have the root ball as a part of that. And so we've clearly called that out at 300. And then staking and guying and attachments is the logical next step at 350. If you toggle back to the smaller plants for a second there. Thanks. You'll see that we have slightly different requirements here because oftentimes these smaller plants may be just shown as areas, and so we've accommodated that as well. So at 400, we're basically saying, which is kind of above and beyond what we ever will require at a design level. We're saying, yes, they're all individual plants, but at the earlier definitions at 300 and 250, they might be shown as areas. So we try to sort of allow for the flexibility for how we are often designing things within the landscape profession, but keeping in mind those big coordination requirements, particularly root balls for our large plants. And I think that about wraps it up for at least these 3 sections. There are more definitions, and like Radu said, we'll be working on expanding those in 24 with a new round of elements.
And to sort of piggyback on that point made by Lauren, and a question in the comments, whether we can expect an alignment with LOIN standard ISO 19650 in future version. We are basically we invited for collaboration landscape architects from not within just US, international representatives of design, of landscape architecture practices, and that's the intention. At least in my mind, I think we should be mindful of the fact that these are that the LOD spec has international visibility and international adoption. And other, national institutions like NIBS are basically factoring in ISO 19650 in development of national BIM standard. So yes, I think we'll do that.
So Radu, are you finished?
Yes. I mean, yeah, we're in the questions and answers, but we had a question and we answered it. So.
Okay, so if I can take this back. Can you make me presenter again, John? Perfect. Okay. So if you recall, these were the learning objectives, and I'd like to kind of use these as a guide for any kind of questions and answers. If there are any of these things that you're fuzzy on, or that you feel we didn't cover well enough, please pipe up. So first of all, are we comfortable with those consistent logical threads throughout the spec? Things like the elimination of nebulous terms like major openings, that sort of thing. Any specific questions on that issue? And John, I assume you can see the chat window. Is that right?
Yeah, I think everyone can, and Radu answered the only question that really came in.
All right. What about the defined terms that we use throughout the spec? These were things like, what do we mean by accurate? What do we mean by nominal versus actual? That sort of thing. Questions on that? Okay. What about the 2022 LOD definitions? Those of you who were familiar with the previous set of definitions, any issues on that that upgrade or update of the definitions? Anything that you see as an issue? Any questions on that? Okay, and then what about the landscape issues? I think Lauren and Radu brought up a whole lot of things that we hadn't really considered when we were developing this thing for buildings. It's in a lot of ways, it's a lot simpler. So any questions for Lauren and Radu on what they presented, and often also suggestions for moving forward?
Joe, I see positive feedback on landscape, but there is a question regarding what was the reference for the level of accuracy?
Oh, that is that's if you Google USIBD LOA specification. Okay, USIBD is the U.S. Institute of Building Documentation, and they put out a specification for level of accuracy, and that is it's similar in concept to the LOD spec, but it deals with measurement accuracy, and you can use that to specify basically specify a reality capture effort. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, I think Jeff posted a comment that he added OmniClass to the LOD matrix. I've seen OmniClass. I found, oh gosh, the Uniformat Tri-Service document is a great one for defining what sits where. So Jeff, yeah, it's nice that the LOD matrix is presented in an Excel form, which leads you to be able to customize it and make it very project specific.
Yeah, the part two of the breakdown is Uniformat 2010, and that is published by CSI, the same outfit that publishes the more familiar master format, which is what the 50 division breakdown for specifications. That's trade based. Uniformat is really location based and system based. Lends itself much better to modeling, and I believe Revit comes with Uniformat 2010 and OmniClass Table 23 out of the box in the assembly code field. And we mentioned OmniClass. OmniClass is also published by CSI. Table 23 is an exact one-to-one relationship to Uniformat 2010. It's just in a slightly different format, and it is a little more internationally recognized. And both of those breakdowns are in the LOD Spec.
Cool. Well, we got 4 minutes left. I feel like we've exhausted the Q&A pool. People don't have any other questions. I think you were wonderfully thorough. So, yes, thank you.
Great, and don't forget to drop your AIA number and name in the chat if you want us to get the AIA credits for you.
Yep. And at the end of this webinar, everyone will get a recording, and we'll put it up on YouTube. So.
And in closing, maybe a few words. I just want to say we're very excited about the progress with LOD for Landscape, but we also want to invite others to join this effort and help with the items that we have to work on. And we actually always work on the old items too. So there's a lot of work ahead of us. That's exciting, and I think we'll provide a lot of new substance to BIM. Essentially, that's my theory here.
Yeah, and I think that will prove out, Radu.
Yep. All right. Well, that being said, thanks everyone. Thanks Radu, Lauren, and Jim for all the work that you've done over the past year and years, Jim, on this, decades. So everyone have a great day, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.